A man walks into court ready to admit he was wrong.
In that location, it's like mad lights. I was confused. But I was guilty.
He doesn't come with a lawyer. He doesn't come with a dramatic defense. He doesn't raise his voice or blame anyone else. He simply stands before the judge and says he ran a red light. But then, with just a few honest words, everything begins to change. Because sometimes, the truth is not as simple as a traffic ticket. Sometimes a red light isn't just a red light. And sometimes, the person sitting behind the bench sees something that everyone else missed. This is the story of one confusing intersection, one nervous driver, and one judge who decided to listen a little closer.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
It was another morning inside the courtroom of Judge Frank Caprio in Providence, Rhode Island. The room had the familiar feeling of a place where everyday people carried small worries that felt enormous to them. Traffic tickets, parking fines, missed payments, mistakes, misunderstandings. Ordinary problems, but problems that still had consequences. At the front of the room sat Judge Caprio, calm and attentive, looking over the paperwork for the next case. The citation was from July 2nd, 2016. The charge was simple on paper: running a red light at Atwells and Harris. A red light violation. Summons number 16409659401. For most people, it might have sounded like an open and shut case. A driver approached an intersection. The light was red. The driver went through it. Case closed. But in Judge Caprio's courtroom, cases were rarely treated like numbers on a sheet of paper. He looked toward the man standing before him. The man seemed respectful, maybe a little nervous, but honest. He wasn't trying to outsmart the system. He wasn't arguing aggressively. He was just there to explain what happened. Judge Caprio looked at him and asked the question that would open the door to the entire story. "What do you want to tell me about this, sir?" The courtroom grew quiet, and the man answered with something unexpected. The driver took a breath. "At that place," he explained, "there were a lot of lights. I got confused." Then he paused, as if he didn't want the judge to think he was making excuses. "But I was guilty." Judge Caprio looked at him closely. "You're guilty?" "Yes," the man said. It was a strange moment. Most people come into court hoping to escape guilt. They search for a loophole. They argue technicalities. They say the officer was wrong, the camera was wrong, the timing was wrong. But this man was different. He admitted the violation. Yet he also tried to describe something that had happened in that intersection. Something that didn't feel clear, even to him. Judge Caprio leaned in. The man continued. "It was that part of Atwells," he said. "There were a lot of lights and I got confused." The judge didn't dismiss him. He didn't interrupt with impatience. He didn't say, "A red light is a red light." Instead, he asked a simple question. "You were confused?" "Yes." "Tell me why you were confused." The man searched for the words. He wasn't a traffic engineer. He wasn't trained to explain signal patterns, lanes, arrows, and traffic flow. He only knew what he saw from behind the wheel. "Because," he said, "there were a lot of lights." For a moment, the explanation sounded almost too simple. A lot of lights. But Judge Caprio didn't treat it like a weak excuse. He seemed to understand that sometimes the simplest explanation is the most honest one. Then the judge began to describe the intersection himself. And slowly, the situation became clearer. He explained that there were 2 lanes of traffic traveling west on Atwells Avenue. For those 2 lanes, both signals were green. In other words, if you were driving in those lanes, you would see a green light telling you to continue. But then there was another lane, a 3rd traffic lane, going in a different direction. For that lane, there was a separate traffic signal with an arrow. And that arrow had turned red. That red arrow meant drivers in that specific lane could not turn left. But to someone approaching the intersection, seeing multiple lights at once, the scene could become confusing. A green light for your lane, a red arrow for another lane. Different signals speaking to different drivers at the same intersection. Judge Caprio looked at the man and laid it out in plain English. You were coming along, and for the traffic in your lane, you saw a green light. But in the other lane, not your lane, there was a red arrow saying you could not turn left. That's where you got confused, right? The man nodded. Yes, sir. And then the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Because now, this was no longer just about whether a driver had crossed a red light. It was about whether the intersection itself was clear enough for a reasonable person to understand. It was about whether a person should be punished for being confused by a confusing design. Judge Caprio smiled slightly, the kind of smile that told everyone in the room he had been waiting for the truth to surface. Excellent explanation, he said. Then, with warmth in his voice, he added, See, I knew you could figure it out. I just knew. I knew you had it in you. The man stood there, listening, probably unsure where this was going. He had already admitted guilt. He had already accepted responsibility. This story is simple, but it carries a powerful message. Sometimes people admit fault because they believe they have no other choice. They think the system is too big, too complicated, or too cold to understand the details of what really happened. But fairness begins when someone takes the time to listen. The driver didn't deny responsibility. He told the truth as best as he could. And the judge didn't blindly punish him just because the ticket existed. He looked deeper. He questioned the situation. He recognized that the road design itself may have created confusion. That is what real justice looks like. Not ignoring the law, not excusing everything, but applying the law with wisdom, context, and humanity. Because behind every case number, there is a person. Behind every ticket, there is a story. And behind every decision, there is an opportunity to be fair. So what do you think? Did Judge Caprio make the right decision by dismissing the case? Or should the driver have been held responsible anyway? Let us know in the comments.